I love the idea of learning, and whenever I think of books, I tend to associate that with learning. So I try to read as many as possible. But the problem is that the only thing that I tend to do a lot of the times is just read through them and then move on to the next one. And then I end up forgetting pretty much all of the information that I learned. And this is called passive reading, compared to active reading, which is the main thing that I'm going to be talking about today. Whenever you passively read, all you're doing is just reading line by line by line and then going on to the next one. But whenever you actively read, you are getting engaged in the information and thinking critically about it, comparing it to other things, and then filling in the gaps in your knowledge. The most important aspect of actually remembering what you read is trying to make different neural connections by experiencing the information in as many different ways as you possibly can in your brain. To give you an analogy, if you're trying to move a bed and you need to tie it down, then if you read a book, just passively read it, then that is one string going over it. It might be a little thick of a string, but it won't actually keep the bed down. But whenever you actively read and you think critically about it, then that adds an entire strap over one side. And then whenever you compare it to another piece of information, then that adds another strap crossing it over. So the more ways that you try to think about the information, then the more neural connections it will make in your brain. Whereas if you simply reread the book after you have already read it, then that might make that first string a little bit thicker, but it will never get to the point of where it will hold that bed down whenever you are driving 70 miles down the highway. So you have to actually work towards understanding the information rather than just being able to recognize it. But before you even pick up a book to start reading it, you still want to pick it up, but you want to look through the table of contents and the introduction to see if it's actually something that you are interested in learning about, and if the style of writing is going to suit you. I mean, if you are reading a textbook, then you pretty much have no choice because it's probably for class, but it will help give you a big overview of what the book is about. Because whenever you are reading to learn, the most important thing is to not waste your time on ideas or topics that you don't actually care about or won't contribute to you at all. We are going to be going over 3 main points of the reading process today. The first is pre-reading, and then the second is during reading, and I bet you can guess what the third one is. Yeah, that's right, after reading or post-reading, because those are both 3 key points in the reading process where you can engage the information in a different way. The first thing you want to do to help you remember more of what you read actually has nothing to do with reading, and that is exercising before you read. I've talked about it in many other videos before, the main one being Spark, which is about exercise. Whenever you exercise, it firstly makes you more aware and makes you more able to focus on the information that you're trying to learn, but it also releases BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. The name's not too important. Just know that that neurotropic factor actually helps increase the development and strengthening of neural connections in the brain. So whenever you read over the information, it will make those connections stronger, which will make it much more likely that you will remember. So after you exercise, the technique that is very popular and effective is the KWL method. The K stands for know. What do you already know about the topic? The W stands for what? What do you want to know about the topic? What questions do you have about the information? And the L stands for learn. So what did you learn about the information after you read it? So writing about what you already know about the topic helps to stimulate your brain to get it ready for the information that it is learning. And the what helps you to identify the gaps that you have in your knowledge and the areas that you want to fill in with the information that you're going to be looking for. And then the learn helps you to actually fill in the potential gaps that you had whenever you were actually going through and reading. Then to go along with the KWL, you want to actually skim through the chapter before you actually go in and read it. And this will kind of give you a better idea of what it's going to discuss throughout the chapter. Whenever you're skimming, you're not actually trying to learn the information and figure out the complex points of the chapter, but you are trying to give yourself a bird's eye view. And you probably want to mainly pay attention to the chapter headings, the section headings, anything that has any different italicized or bolded fonts and that sort of things, because that tends to be the information that is more important than everything else. And then after you do this, you can go back to your KWL and then you can write down more questions about what you want to know. And you also might be able to write down some more things that you already knew, but you didn't realize that you knew it until you actually went through the chapter. And you also want to kind of write down any main ideas or key points that you saw throughout the chapter, because this will also help to prime your brain to look for what exactly those key points were all about and what the definitions of them were and that sort of thing. Whenever you're actually in the process of reading through the chapter, then you can do two main things. And the first one kind of goes along with skimming, but whenever you skim through the chapter, you'll also begin to notice where some things aren't necessarily too important, because in a lot of books, there's going to be some filler. It might be either examples elaborating on a topic or just analogies or stories that try to help you understand a certain point much better. But if you already understand what that point is trying to say, then you can just skip through all of the examples and stories that it has for you. If you do need some more elaboration, then it is a good idea to read through that. But you don't want to waste your time whenever you are reading, and don't feel bad about not reading the entire book, because you want to try and maximize your time whenever you are reading. And by being able to identify the important parts of what you're reading, it helps to create more connections and will help begin training your brain to look for that important information when you're reading. Secondly, you can also highlight or underline any of the main ideas that you come across throughout the chapter, or any of the answers to the questions that you had whenever you did the what part of the KWL. This will help make sure that whenever you're going back over it later on, that you don't waste your time looking through the unimportant stuff, and that you can find the main ideas pretty quickly. Now, you can take notes while you are reading, but personally, I would recommend that you wait to do that until after you read, because that is a form of spaced repetition. If you immediately write down the information after you learn it, then it will be fresh on your mind and easy for you to remember. But the brain creates stronger neural connections if you actually have to struggle with remembering it. So if you wait till you get to the end of the chapter, then it will have to struggle a lot more than if you just finish the paragraph and write the notes over it. But if you are starting out, then that might not be a bad idea to just read a paragraph and then summarize it right next to it or on a notepad. Over time, you want to try and expand more and more how much space between what you learned and the reflection and trying to remember and write down all of the notes. If you're in a textbook, then it's probably a good idea to take it by section rather than doing it by chapter, because those tend to be super long and eventually you might be able to build up to it. But at this point, I would just recommend trying to summarize everything in your own words and just trying to get as much as possible remembered. And then after you do that, you can go back and look to see if you forgot anything. Going back to the highlighting and underlining, this makes it much easier for you to identify what you did not remember and what you did remember, because if you try and summarize it and then go back to that part and then there's nothing highlighted or underlined, then you don't really know what you are looking for and what you might have missed whenever you were summarizing it. But if you have all the important points underlined or highlighted, then you know exactly what you're looking for. Lastly, books are not in a vacuum by themselves. You can compare and contrast different ideas from different books. And this will actually help strengthen those neural connections because it puts another harness over that bed to help hold it down more firmly. And a good way to do that is by creating a mental map in your head, or by actually writing out a mind map connecting different concepts to different ideas from other books or just from different chapters, and just trying to create a web of information, because if you connect that piece of information to something else, then that will create a different neural connection in your brain. And then the more connections that you find on your mental map, then the more connections that you'll find in your brain. And just the process of trying to find those connections will make all the ones that you have in your brain so much stronger in the first place. At the end of the day, the best way to remember what you read is to actually think about it, because something that I've struggled with is not applying and doing stuff with the information that I learned. So by thinking about the information, then it helps wrap your brain around it in so many different ways and makes it to where you don't have to go over the information multiple times. While this initial reading will take a lot longer than you would otherwise, it will be a lot shorter in the long run because you won't have to reread nearly as much, and whenever you do reread, it will be a lot more effective because you'll still be applying these techniques. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like. And if you didn't see my video last week about why you hate reading and how to read more, then make sure you check that out. I'll see you in the next one.